from Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. And Ryan has been out, I understand, Ryan, out in the early morning, the last few days, looking for the elusive sage grouse. So Ryan, why don't you take it away and we'll get started.
Sure, exactly. I'm here right now. I'm in Wisdom, Montana. Raise your hand if you guys know where Wisdom is, because Wisdom's not on the call. So raise your hand if you know where Wisdom is. That's where I'm at right now. And what we did yesterday is we had a teacher workshop, and we brought teachers out, and they learned about a special bird that lives in the Big Hole Valley here in Montana. So you raise your hand, you know where the Big Hole Valley is. Raise your hand if you even live in the Big Hole Valley. All right. So I know Mrs. Nelson's class and Mrs. Borge, you guys are in Polaris. Where's Mrs. Hunt's class at?
Ryan, they're from Hamilton.
Hamilton, perfect. All right, we have the Western Montana crew here. This is excellent. So the last call that we just did this, we had some folks on from different states. We had someone from Kentucky and someone from Washington too. So I had to explain them what Western Montana looks like. I don't have to do that for you guys, or even explain to you guys what the Big Hole Valley looks like. So that's kind of nice at getting started here. But I'm an education specialist with the Fish, Wildlife and Parks, and I'm helping out Vanna Backdory. She's a biologist that loves working with the schools and teaching people about fish and wildlife. And one species she spends a lot of time studying is the sage grouse here in the Big Hole Valley. We'll tell you a little bit more about why we're studying them in the Big Hole Valley and why the Big Hole Valley sage grouse are so special. So first of all, I got a sense from some of the other students, but just raise your hand if you've seen a sage grouse before. Maybe you don't know what a sage grouse is, but raise your hand if you've seen a sage grouse. So a couple people have actually seen a sage grouse. So first, Kathleen, if you want to show them the video, just show them the Sage Grouse Initiative's website, and then we'll show them that video on there so you can show what I got to see this morning and what their teachers actually, yep, that one right there. Scroll.
I'm getting there.
Yeah, so this is the best video I could find close up. My camera wasn't that good, or we were that close, but this video shows what a sage grouse looks like when it's dancing or displaying.
Okay, can everybody see it? Hang on, can everybody see that okay? Yeah. All right, here we go.
So what he's doing is he's sucking in about a gallon of air. So he sucks in about a gallon of air and then releases it. And that's what's making that pop noise. So you can see its air sacs there twice. It gulps, or it goes, and then pop, sends it out. So you can hear that noise from about a mile. Some of you guys' schools in the Big Hole Valley are just out of that range, but you can almost hear them at your schools. There's quite a few leks throughout the Big Hole Valley. Awesome. So if we can just return to that Sage Grouse Initiative page for just a second, it talks about everything that you would want to know about sage grouse you can find on the Sage Grouse Initiative's website, all the way from fun projects, crafts, how much they weigh, how big they are. So sage grouse, it looks like, they kind of look like a turkey. Raise your hand if you think that bird looks like a turkey. So they kind of look like turkeys. They smell just like turkeys. They're not as big as turkeys, and they're part of a family called grouse. So put up how many fingers. Put up how many fingers different kinds of grouse you think live in Montana. What do you think?
Click on the volume.
One kind of grouse lives in Montana, two kinds of grouse, or how many fingers of grouse? How many different kinds of grouse do you think live in Montana? Put up that number of fingers. Right, so see quite a few fingers coming up. All right, so this sage grouse is one of the species of grouse we have in Montana. We have two that live on the prairie, out in the grass, in the sagebrush, and one is the sharp-tailed grouse, and then one is the sage grouse. And then there's 3 kinds of grouse that live in the Montana, up in the mountains. And we have the dusky grouse, there's the rough grouse, and there's also the spruce grouse. A lot of people call them fool's hens that they'll find up in the mountains, but there's different kinds of grouse that you'll find, not just the sage grouse too. So, and anytime that you guys have, is there any questions you guys have now that you've gotten to see that bird? Maybe some of you've seen it for the first time. Looks like we could take a question from Polaris. If you guys want to unmute and Polaris and ask us a question before we move on.
So, I saw a sage grouse yesterday. And I think it was a female because it didn't have the big white chest.
Great. Yes, we're going to go into that too. So that's good. How about Jackson? Does anyone in Jackson have a question about sage grouse before we move on and talk about what I was doing? We'll take one question from Jackson.
Go ahead, Riker. So, when sage grouses do the dance, what dance or what how and how loud can they be? Can you hear?
Oh, it's
and miles.
How many miles? I would say it's kind of within a mile. You can hear them about a mile away, but then after that, the sound doesn't seem to carry. But the thing is, mostly in your guys' area around Jackson and Wisdom, it seems like they're not down by the river. They're up in the hills in the sagebrush. So if they're behind a hill or in a little crack or anything that's not in line of sight, so a lot of times you can't hear them. It's just like if you're looking for bugling elk. All right, a question from, was it, so where was it?
Hamilton.
Hamilton. We'll take a question from Hamilton.
How do the animal, how did the sage grouse dance like that?
Oh, it's something they've been doing for a long, long time. I think it's special that you guys live in Western Montana and you see some of these incredible creatures displaying a lot. They've been doing this for hundreds, if not thousands of years. The Sandhill Cranes, another one you have around Hamilton. Raise your hand if you've ever seen a Sandhill Crane. They jump up in the air, they make a beautiful call, kind of sounds like, and our sage grouse, you know, it's a special dance that they do. And the reason they do it is they're trying to impress the female birds. And when we go to start counting them, you'll see that, you know, the females aren't just all standing around watching, but they'll kind of come in and out and they're hard to count. But the males, they have to do all this crazy good dancing just so they can get the females around to pass on the generation, have more sage grouse around too. So they're just trying to impress the girl grouse. So that's where this comes from. All right, so next one, Kathleen's going to show us a video about sage grouse. It's just going to show you real quickly what I'm doing. And the video is actually from the Big Hole and the biologist that I'm working with to do this. So she's going to
do you want to show the, do you want me to show the FWP web YouTube first?
Oh yeah, we could do that.
Just so they know where it is.
All right, so this is the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks YouTube page. There's literally hundreds, if not a couple thousand videos, instructional videos, how to do videos, and videos about wildlife. And one of my favorite that Mike Gurnett did was actually produced in the Big Hole here. And it's right here, it's the sage grouse video. And this is a lek. We'll talk more about lek here in just a minute.
So here we go.
The best time of day to count the sage grouse on the lek so that you don't disturb them is to get here before daybreak. By the time it gets light enough to count, the birds are used to me sitting there in the truck, and so I'll stay long enough until I get a good count of the males, which are pretty easy to see, and then the females, which are much more difficult to see.
Just like the sound of a bugling elk announces that fall is on its way, spring is announced by sage grouse, displaying on their ancient leks found in the wide open sagebrush plains of the American West.
Sage grouse are an interesting species. We refer to them as having a narrow niche. That is, that they're very specifically adapted to the sagebrush grassland habitats. As a whole, the sage grouse has declined in some states up to 50% or more. In Montana, we're fortunate that we have still vast areas of sagebrush grasslands. One of the reasons is the fact that we have a lot of traditional ranching in the state.
As summer progresses, the birds will seek out areas that are less dense with sagebrush and have high succulent forb content to them. And then in the wintertime, they'll seek out areas of denser, taller sagebrush.
The sage grouse doesn't have a muscular gizzard with grit in it, and they can't digest hard foods like seeds. And so in the wintertime, the sage grouse's diet is made up of the leaves and shoots of the sage. This is Mike Gurnett, out among Montana's Fish, Wildlife, and Parks.
Great, thanks. So all those sagebrush, raise your hand if you've seen sagebrush before. Everyone's been seeing sagebrush from the classes right here. So sometimes sagebrush doesn't seem like the most valuable thing. Maybe, you know, if you've tried to run somewhere, ride your bike, you get stuck in the sagebrush, you can't go through it. Maybe your horse or the cows, they don't like eating it, but it's really important to wildlife. And the sage grouse, Mike just said, its whole life revolves around sagebrush. It nests in the sagebrush. It only eats sagebrush in the winter. They can't eat seeds and nuts and all those other things. So if there's no sagebrush around, there'd be no sage grouse. So it's a species that he says narrow niche. When you get older, you'll learn about the word niche, and that's what you're specialized to do. Some animals can live anywhere, but then there's some animals that can only live in one certain place. And if their habitat, their home changes in any way, they're not around anymore. So I'm going to share this screen here quickly of a PowerPoint that's just going to show you guys what I did and what some of your teachers did, or maybe your teachers will do in the future with us here. Give them a thumbs up if you guys can see my PowerPoint that I put up here. And I can't see them, so if you can just let me know if they give you the thumbs up, I'll move ahead then.
Yep, we're good. I was muted.
All right, thumbs up from them. Yeah, I'm not quite sure where the setting is where I could see them too, so I'll just ask you as we go with questions.
Sure.
So, all right, so why are we even counting sage grouse? Why does this matter? If you live somewhere where there's sage grouse and you see them, you might think, well, what's the big deal? Why do we need to care about sage grouse? They're doing just fine. Well, if you look at this map here, you can see the light green is where they're no longer. So sage grouse, we have sage grouse and they are doing well in some areas, but in that light colored area, they're gone. What's the word you use for an animal when it's gone? Gone forever off the planet and there's none around anymore, like the dinosaurs. Can you, if you want to ask them, Kathleen, to get someone to nail that?
Sure. There was some in Miss Borges' class that, man, those hands are shooting up there. So somebody's going to have to unmute and let us know. What's that word?
I know. Oh, sure.
Extinct. Yeah, you're right. So if it's gone, totally gone, a bird that comes to mind right away, the passenger pigeon. People thought, oh man, there's so many passenger pigeons. We'll never run out of passenger pigeons. You could look them up with your teacher on the internet. They're gone. They're extinct. It's a really sad story. Because we didn't take any action to help the passenger pigeon out at the time. But if you look here, those areas, the light colored green, it's to them. If you lived in that place where there's the light colored green, they would feel extinct to you. But the word that we use as scientists is called extirpated. Say extirpated, everyone. Extirpated, that just means you're gone from a locality or a different region. So the green, the dark green that you guys see are still places that you can find sage grouse. So everyone gets competitive out here west and we want to know who's got the most sage grouse. And everyone kind of talks about, well, Wyoming. Wyoming has the most sage grouse. Montana has the second most sage grouse. Idaho has the third most. And I'm not sure out of Utah, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, who comes up next. But the top three are Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. But you can see that they are declining their numbers. So here's a map not too long ago where they show exactly where sage grouse are left in Montana. But let me back up. So if you look at this map here, the Bitterroot Valley, what color is the Bitterroot Valley? Is it light colored green or dark? So the Bitterroot, can you tell us what color you guys have and the word to describe sage grouse where you guys are at?
Okay, Miss Hunt's class, what color is the Bitterroot?
Light green.
Light green, yeah. So the Bitterroot Valley used to have sage grouse. They're all gone now. The word we use is extirpated. So they're no longer found there, but there used to be sage grouse there. If you look further down, the kids from Jackson and Polaris, you guys still have sage grouse. And the reason you still have sage grouse is because of the way of life down here and the traditional ranching practices as you drive through the valley, and it looks just like it did for a long time, the ranching communities. That's why there's still sage grouse here. If you headed up to some other places, you see a lot more homes and development and things like that. Sage grouse don't like that. The main reason sage grouse are declining is habitat loss and fragmentation. So you can see here again, here's where you can find sage grouse in Montana still. The yellow is where there's still good habitat, but for some reason, they're not finding them anymore. And there are leks in the Big Hole Valley where for some reason, they're not using them anymore. So that's a concern too. Here's a picture of the Big Hole Valley. This is what it looks like. You have this lush, beautiful river bottoms, and then it's sage grouse flats that lead into the mountains, and it's perfect home for the sage grouse. So time frame, when did all this take place? I got up at 4 a.m. So raise your hand if you get up at 4 a.m. Any hands, Kathleen?
Sorry, yep, we've got a couple.
Whoa, they get to be sage grouse biologists. All right. So we got up at 4 a.m. and we all met with the teachers at 5 o'clock a.m. and we had to be out to the lek before 5:30 a.m. Why did we go so early? We went out there in the dark, we could sneak in, and then when the sun came up, the grouse, maybe they're a little confused. They're like, huh, that pickup's been there the whole time. You know, I shouldn't be worried about that pickup truck. So then they just go about doing everything just like they're doing because we showed up in the dark and they didn't know we were there. But when you're in the dark there, you can hear them even before the sun comes up. About 6 a.m., activity starts peaking. All you can hear is bobbling and popping, and there's more and more birds showing up. And it seems like the closer you get to 7, they're still fired up. And then after 7 o'clock, they start disappearing off the lek. So a lek, to clear it up from that video before, is just a place where the birds gather to dance. And in a place where there's thick sagebrush, they need to find an opening so you can see them, right? Because if they were dancing in the thick sagebrush, you'd never see them in there. And that's why in the videos, you'll see examples of it's hard to see them in the sagebrush, but as soon as they walk out in the open, you can see them. So this is all said and done by about 8 o'clock. All right. So your data sheets, if you had those picked up, I'm just going to show you what your teacher filled out. So these are, if we went out and just watched sage grouse, that's great. We call that birding. So raise your hand if you go birding, if you go out and just look for birds. Raise your hand if you've ever gone out with just the purpose to go find birds.
Yep, we've got a lot of birders.
Awesome. That's great. So if you want to take it a notch up, you could be a citizen scientist. If you did this as a career and a job and you went to college and you wanted to help out, or even as a volunteer, you could be a biologist. But you know, if you just did it as a hobby for fun, if you collected data and shared it, you'd be a citizen scientist. So I'm going to call our lek name. I gave it a secret name so I don't give it away because it was a pretty giveaway for the locals if I said it. But it was a bumpy road lek. This is the first day we were there. It was April 15th, 2021. We started counting birds at 6 a.m. They actually do this sometimes up in the air, but we did it from the ground in our truck. And then it's also important that we record the weather. So as you go on and learn about science, young kids, you'll learn more about variables. So things can be different, but every time you study an animal and record numbers, you always want to do it exactly the same way. One thing we can't control is the weather though. So that's why we always record the air temperature and wind speed. Then you can see here, there's all sorts of other information that if we questioned our counts, we'd put our names down here. And then you can see the important part down here, it says males and females. So that's what I'm going to be testing you guys. You're going to help me find the difference, how many numbers, help me count the birds. But the first day we were out to the lek, we counted 14 birds, 14 males. That's the only number that really matters to us in lek counts because it's so hard to see the females and they don't always come around as we use that benchmark of the males to measure how active the lek is, and you'll see why here shortly. You want to have as little disturbance as possible. We noted that. What we also did is we collected feathers and droppings, and that's for DNA. Raise your hand if you guys have ever heard about scientists using DNA. Maybe you saw it on TV. Any kids there heard about DNA scientists using it?
Yes.
All right. So when you talk about, well, how much sagebrush do they need? Well, they don't like 100% sagebrush, but you can see we had about 95% sagebrush cover. If it drops below 70%, most of the time of year, that's not the habitat that you're going to be finding. In the comments, what do you guys find unique about the comments here? Raise your hand and unmute if you want. Like, what was unique that had nothing to do with sage grouse that we saw in the comments?
Hey, Ryan, you have a little black box. I don't know if you can get rid of that.
Is it in the way?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think it's stuck there.
Oh, don't worry
I'll
about it.
describe in the comments, I put that there was snow geese. So there was snow geese flying around in the valley here. I saw them today too. Antelope, elk. So what you can already tell is that when you're in good sage grouse habitat, you're in good habitat for many other animals. So when sage grouse are doing well, usually the antelope population, the elk population, the mule deer population are all doing well too. They call that an indicator species or an umbrella species. So that's why we make notes of the other birds too. What's unique about the ravens? They're ruthless. I'll tell you about it in a little bit, but they're just after pestering the sage grouse along with the raptors, a hawk or an eagle. They can make them leave the lek too. So here's some data. You can see that they might see up to 40 birds. Those are some of the highest numbers. Looking at the lek counts in the Big Hole Valley, they saw that there was up to 40 birds. We didn't quite see that many. So, all right, does everyone raise your hand if you can see a sage grouse? So raise your hand. This is a picture where it may not be as easy to see them. Raise your hand if you see them.
Yep, I'm seeing some raised hands.
All right, now hold your fingers up how many you can actually see out there. So take you and hold the number of fingers up, the number of sage grouse you can see in that picture. All right, so taking a look at this picture here, you can see that those white ruffs, right around their air sacs, that's what makes them easy to see. It's hard when there's snow on the ground. So they're strutting, they want to be visible. But in this picture here, because I've looked at a lot of them, I can see some of them are facing backwards. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and actually 8. One head is just poking up. You see anyone with 8 fingers up, Kathleen? If you had 8 up, you can pat yourself on the back. So that's pretty good. And you must have pretty good skills at spotting sage grouse. So what I'm going to show you here now, here's a video. So in this video now, what's going to happen is this is going to scan. I want you to count sage grouse. So it looks like most of you aren't actually on computers and couldn't chat. So I'll do the same thing with fingers. We'll show.
You know what, Ryan, before we start, we've got a kiddo in Miss Borges' class who is just getting set up. I think they're at home. Is that right? Yeah, okay. So I think they're settled. Everybody else ready to go? Give me a thumbs up if you're ready to count. Okay, they are ready.
Right.
Do it.
I'm going to count 2. And then in Jackson, your teacher was out. She should be pretty good by now too, because she looked for the birds too. All right, so I'm going to hit play. And this is going to look just like it does when I look through my binoculars and I'm trying to count them. See how many you can find.
1, 2.
They move around a lot, don't they? And then I'll count back. All right, I got 6. Raise your hand if you got 6. You see
Oh,
that one right there? There's one do you guys see my mouse? But on the left-hand side of the screen, there's one that's right out here that's just barely moving around. So my point exactly, a lek is this open area where they go to dance. The tough ones that count are the ones that end up back in the sagebrush, and you'll see them coming in. And it's kind of like elk. So if you've been elk hunting, a lot of the bigger, tougher elk, they're going to be out strutting in the wide open. And then if you've ever heard your parents, if you're an elk hunter, talk about the satellite bulls. And those are the younger bulls that are wandering around the edge, just seeing that the big tough bull lets his guard down and they can come on in and act like they're big and tough too. So I think that sage grouse act a lot like elk. So if you like elk, I think sage grouse are a lot like them. And we actually saw about 30 elk right near where we were doing our survey too. All right, you guys ready for a hard one? So this is a lek that your teachers didn't visit, a little further north, but this is a really tough one, but I want you guys to look as hard as you can now and see if you can see any sage grouse. All right, you guys ready? Here we go. Raise your hand if you can see a sage grouse.
They say they can.
Really? Oh, wow. Can you see my cursor when I use it, Kathleen?
Yes. Mhm.
All right. Let me play it again. All right. So I'm going to play the video again. Look right up where my cursor is. Here's one. Here's one. There's one.
I can see it.
You guys see them? So the reason it was easier when I was out, we were a long ways away from, because you can hear them, right? Remember I told you could hear these things almost a mile away? Well, you can see the white dots and their tail feathers moving around. So that was the hardest one that I had, but I thought I'd throw that out there. If you guys actually saw those sage grouse, you should be coming along with Vanna to count sage grouse, because that was a hard one.
I think next year these kids in Polaris and Jackson need to do that.
All right. So here we are. This was actually, I think one of, I think the teacher in Jackson spotted these, but we did hear them, and we were watching a lek, and then we call them satellite males if they're wandering around out in different areas. We couldn't tell if this was another lek because there was a bunch of them, but I'm going to play this video and see if you can spot these sage grouse. Do you guys see them this time? Raise your hand. Put how many fingers up you can see.
Three, they're saying.
Three? I actually had two in that one. That's all I could see. But this was actually the same lek. I was wrong. This wasn't the hill that we saw behind the major lek. So, all right. So right here now, Morgan Jacobson, he's the information education guy in Bozeman. He's got a lot better camera than I do. So the other footage was my footage. This is Morgan's. So he's just going to show you, if you look here, why it's so hard to see these grouse. So now he's zoomed in. Do you guys see where the lek is? There's all these little cut banks where they could be above or behind any little area. Oh, you saw one. There's one down the bottom right-hand corner there. So you got 1, 2, 3, and then there's a fourth one over here. But anytime they go down and they're behind the bank or up in the sage, it's hard to see them. All right, before we start this one, all right, watch really close because soon there's going to be a hen. Someone said that they saw a hen. I think it was someone in Polaris. They saw a sage grouse hen recently. So what I want you to do is look close and see if you can see, oops.
Oh.
Hen sage grouse. They're the hardest of all to spot, are those hens. And we still record them, but we don't use them in our direct numbers. All right, so let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Look as close as you can, 6. I see 6 right now.
I see 8.
8? All right. This is hard. Oh, do you guys see it? Do you see the hen?
Yeah.
Who sees the hen? Raise your hand if you see a hen. It's right here. That's the hen. Do you guys see where the finger is and the cursor? Do you see it too, Kathleen?
Well, I'm seeing where you're pointing, but I'm not sure what I'm
Yeah.
looking at.
I'll go back. That's why we.
Oh, yeah. It's moving now. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna go back to where you can see the hens, just so we'll look one more time because Morgan spotted it. I didn't see the hen right away, but now that it's in the video, he was explaining, hey, there's a hen out there. I could never see it, but now I can. Look. Oh, see its head right there? So
Oh my goodness.
sneaking through the lek. So the males, they want to be seen. The hens do not want to be seen. So you can see she's right here and she just walked up on the lek here. She's looking for the biggest and toughest boy out there is what she's doing. And she wanders out there and that's who's going to be her partner. So we saw these birds on the hill behind us. How many do you guys see here? This was a new spot. We're going to tell the biologists about it because we had no idea that they would be there. So that's something that if, you see a new lek or a spot or an area, it's something your biologist would want to know about. Or even if you have one on your ranch, it's something that you tell people in the birding community. It's important that, stuff that we can use. So you can see here, how many can you see? 3. So I got 3. What's this? There's the hen. You guys see the hen?
Yep. Just
There
barely.
she is. Sneaking through the lek there. So I got 3. Oh, look at this. There's another one up here. Do you guys see that one back in the sage? I think there's one back here.
Is this like the Where's Waldo of
Yeah.
biology?
So I think that's another male that we, oh, yep, you saw it with all the rough on it. So that was 4. So there's 4 males there. Keep your eyes. All right, here now, this is an official count. So count now, see what you can get. We're gonna go left to right. So go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Totally.
All right, all I see is 11. Now let's do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a hen right there. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 that time.
I counted 13.
13. All right. So if you counted more, you may have saw one that I didn't see. And that's exactly why it's nice to bring other people with. Because just like if you ask your teacher and she was along with this, maybe one person said 13 and then the other person said 15. What do you need to do then? You got to recount. You got to count them again. So that's why you don't just cruise on up to the lek, count one time and be gone. With your count. They call it a consensus. So you got to eventually end up with a number that you all agree on. Because as a biologist, we always say this is no data is better than bad data. So if you don't know, don't just put a number down. You want to make sure that your numbers are correct. So when I was out with Vanna, this is something we saw that was different than sage grouse. So
Oh,
I got excited about it.
I love it.
You can see sage grouse down the bottom. You see snow geese up there. We were there with the teachers. We actually saw elk.
19 or 20.
In the valley here too. There was antelope.
That on your notes.
But when you're in a place like this,
Sure, yeah.
this is critical habitat for wildlife, especially in the spring and winter time. And it's a special place. And I'll stop sharing here for a minute. So pause share. Oh, stop video, new share. There, stop share. All right. So Vanna's excited about her job. I'm excited about my job. I love working with wildlife, and everyone gets into working with wildlife because they love animals. But the real skill in working with wildlife is working with people. And everyone thinks like, oh, you just gotta be really good at working with animals. It's all about working with people. So all of you from Jackson, Polaris, to over in Hamilton, if you guys as young students grow up caring about wildlife and where they live and their habitats, that's going to mean that they're around for future generations. And I have kids too. And I always talk about when people ask me about why do you care so much about taking care of animals, is because I want them around for future generations and for my kids and their kids. And I hope that you guys, never, the kids here in the Big Hole, they don't ever have to talk about, well, remember when there was sage grouse in the Big Hole? They're here, and hopefully they're here to stay, the Big Hole sage grouse, and not something that eventually disappear though either. So any questions before we move on to talk about something that's similar to the sage grouse?
I would think we'd have a bunch of questions because these kids actually live there and see some things. So let's go to Miss Nelson's class first. I saw a couple hands up there. And so let's do 1 or 2 questions from each class. So we'll go to Mrs. Nelson's and then Miss Borges and then Miss Hunt's. So go ahead, Miss Nelson's class.
Why do sage grouse suck up air and then they spit it out?
Oh, that's a great question, because remember how hard it was to see the hen? You couldn't see it, right? I mean, all you could see was a little bit of movement. But if you puffed up really big and made yourself larger and white, and then what's the only thing you could do better about getting noticed? You make noise. So you get big, and then your big white thing on the sagebrush, you can see it, and then you go pop, 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 and send out this really loud noise. And next thing, all the other sage grouse girls, the hens that are walking around, they may be a long ways off. They're like, whoa, did you see that? I can see them down there, and they go check it out. So the sage grouse males, they have, the biologists, they say they have a strong fidelity. Well, they want to be there, and they always go to the same spot. So the boys, the roosters, always go to the same lek. Forever and ever, they've been going to the same spot. Since they were born, they're like, that's where I go. That's my lek. That's my hangout. That's the only place I go. The hens don't. They'll wander from lek to lek, and kind of check out, the different leks. So they'll see what's going on. The boys, they always go to the same hangout and display there, and the girls wander around and check it out. So they kind of come in, look around, see what's going on, and zoop, they're out of there. So, all right.
Great. How about one more question for Miss Nelson's class?
How many eggs do sage grouse lay at a time?
All right. Well, they'll lay from 6 to 9. If you look on the Sage Grouse Initiative's website, they'll say 6 to 9. Vanna, the biologist, has offered, you can talk to your teacher about this, but she actually goes out and checks nests after they hatch. She said she could always bring a school out in the Big Hole and actually do that. But for some reason, she wants to capture this on video. When a sage grouse hatches, you know what an egg looks like. It's like an oval like that. Well, they kind of crack it around the middle, and they pop the top off, and they put the top inside of the bottom. And she's like, how do they do that? They don't have hands. How do they make that happen? But that's what a successful hatched nest egg looks like for a sage grouse. And then if it's been predated upon, what do you think are some things that would eat a sage grouse? Just blurt it out and just say it. If something that might eat a sage grouse.
A fox.
Hawks, fox, coyotes, all those things. Anything that's big enough to eat a sage grouse will, but ravens they'll pester them too and eat their eggs. So the eggs will either be smashed, crushed, or pecked apart, depending on what predator ate it. Vanna knows just because she's looked at it a lot, but they have about 6 to 9 eggs. That's about how many eggs they have. And when their babies hatch, they don't sit there and mom feeds them. What happens as soon as they hatch, they move. They start going to look for food. What they found, this is new information from the biologist. For some reason, sage grouse love to nest next to anthills. So they'll nest next to an anthill so they can run out and grab a few ants, eat them, come back to the nest. Because they barely ever leave the nest. But if they run out and they can eat off that anthill and all those bugs are there and get back quickly, that's a good place for them to nest. So anthills are very, very important for sage grouse. So, you always look out there and you're like, what's the value of that? What's it worth? It's just a pile of ants. Well, to a sage grouse, that pile of ants is important.
Great. That's like a sage grouse grocery store, an ant pile. Yeah. Let's go to Miss Borges' class for a couple questions.
How do you tell the difference between a grouse and a pheasant?
Oh, all right. So Kathleen always gives me a hard time. So here's my grouse on a stick. So pheasants are an introduced species. They're not from here. They were brought here and introduced. People like to go hunting for pheasants. They're not really well adapted at a lot of our habitats here in Western Montana. You can see here a sage grouse has feathers over its nose. So when it gets super cold out here in Western Montana, you know, you can use a gaiter, put it over your nose to stay warm when you're out there. Pheasants can't do that. Their nose is out there and they get cold. Grouse, they have this feathers over their nose, help stay warm. And then also too, they have feathers on their legs too. Pheasants don't, they're not adapted for here. So they have feathers on their legs that help keep them warm. And then also too, I wish I could show you closer, but they have these little comb-like structures that grow off their feet. They're called pectinations. They're actually like snowshoes. So their feet get bigger in the winter, helps them walk up on the snow. Pheasants can't do that. So I could name about 20 things that sage grouse have that pheasants don't, but pheasants are cool too, but sage grouse are a native species that's well adapted and designed to live here in the sagebrush prairie, but they couldn't live other places. You can go to South Dakota where it's mostly corn and small grain crops and there's shelter belts and things, and pheasants will do great there, but sage grouse would not make it because they only eat sagebrush. There's no sagebrush there. So
that's fascinating. How about one more question for Ms. Borges' class, and Callie, we will get to you, I promise. Okay, Ms. Borges' class.
Why are we learning about sage grouse?
Wow, good question.
So why are you learning about sagebrush? Is that what you said?
Sage grouse.
Sage grouse. Sage grouse. Why are you learning about sage grouse? All right. Well, I hope that you're, first of all, just aware that you have sage grouse where you live near Polaris. And I think that's important for you to know because you should know about things where you live, right? So that's one thing. I hope you appreciate sage grouse because they're so unique and they're an important part of the ecosystem. And I hope that eventually maybe you even want to help sage grouse. So that's kind of my main thing. And I hope you like where you live because you live in a wonderful place, and I hope you protect it and you play there too. And I know there's some great fun places to play around this country too. So I think the sage grouse makes the Big Hole Valley what it is. I mean, if you didn't have some of the wild native creatures that you have here in the Big Hole Valley, I don't think it would be as cool as it is. So hopefully you like where you live. So
good answer. Let's go to Callie from Polaris. She has been very patient. Go, Callie.
So why or what is the main, not the main food, but are there any other foods that sage grouse eat?
Good question. All right, so they eat only sagebrush in the winter. So sagebrush is the only thing they eat in the winter months. In the spring, they'll eat a lot of like insects, so ants, beetles, grasshoppers, things like that. So eat a lot of bugs. And then they mentioned succulent forbs. Well, what's a succulent forb? Flowers. So they'll go walk around, they'll be looking for little flowers and things like that to eat, and that's really nutritious. Does anyone have alfalfa? People there, if you guys live on ranches, you have alfalfa. Raise your hand if you have alfalfa. Raise your hand if you've seen the grouse out in the alfalfa. Has anyone seen? Yep. So sage grouse they'll eat alfalfa. So alfalfa is a really tasty thing for them. They'll come in there, eat it because it's a succulent form. It has little flowers, purple flowers on it, too. But that's not available to them year round, right? Because they can't go into a succulent, beautiful looking alfalfa field in December. It's not there. And then it's dried up and your cows will eat it. And that's good forage and feed for them and your horses and everything else, but not for sage grouse. That's when they switch over and they're just eating sagebrush. But sagebrush, this is something to talk about the topic about sagebrush versus sage grouse. So have you ever drove down a road where all the sagebrush is removed and it's gone? There's snow all over roads, bumpy, and you're like trying to get down the road. And then you drive down, there's sagebrush on the side of the road and the road's clear. Why? Because it holds all the snow. So sagebrush stops the snow and holds it kind of like a snow fence. It keeps moisture on the landscape. And then it also creates this shade and this almost like its own little ecosystem environment that nurses and helps out native grasses and forbs. So even with your cows and your horses, when they go out and graze, they find the tastiest, most nutritious things out there mixed in and around sagebrush. So yeah, that's a good question.
Cool. Let's go to Miss Hunt's class in Hamilton. You guys got a couple questions?
What do the hens look like?
Oh, here's a picture of a hen. It's funny that you asked that because I keep telling you they're hard to find, they're hard to see. You never even got to see a picture of a hen. So that is a hen sage grouse. They have some of the best camouflage anywhere. And Ms. Nelson was talking about, as we were driving out, there was one walking down the road and you could barely see it. So a lot of times when you see them, it's really difficult unless they cross the road or the trail in front of you, or they're out in your alfalfa. It'll be easier to see in the green. So, all right, good question.
Got another question, Hamilton?
When do the sage grouse have mating season?
Oh, it's right now. It is happening as we speak. We were out this morning, so it'll end soon. But if you were to go out to this habitat that I'm describing and go for a hike early in the morning and listen with your ears, you may hear some bobbling and popping. And I would guess that with you guys here, if you went to that right habitat, it's probably on your own land, your own ranch. You guys have sage grouse and you could find a lek.
I think we have one more question from Hamilton, looks like.
Yeah, we have one last question. We have to go because we have to go home. Thank you so much, guys.
Yep.
Thanks.
Why do they have in between their chest they have a yellow like clear bubble in their chest?
Oh, that's the air sac where they bring that air in to pop out. So yeah, that's a good question. So do I have time for a quick story, Kathleen, before I show them the antelope?
I think Hamilton has to go, but I don't know about Polaris and Jackson. So are we good, Polaris and Jackson, or do you guys have to go?
Good.
Okay.
Right. So when I was growing up, I didn't grow up in Montana. You guys growing up in an amazing place, but I grew up in North Dakota and I discovered a sharp-tailed grouse lek, not far like behind our house. And they make a funny noise and dance around and make all these cool noises. And it was cool. I always would go look at them and see them. And then I went off to college and I was gone for a while. I came back and it was gone. The lek was gone. They dug it up and they turned it into a gravel pit. And the grouse are gone. There's no sharp-tailed grouse around where I was anymore. So it starts to make you think about, like, if you know more about these birds, where they live in that spot, that's an important place to them. If they don't have that spot, that lek, or this kind of habitat that we're talking about, they may be gone and they could be extirpated, that, like I was telling you before. But at least from me going out and doing my surveys that I helped Vanna with here in the Big Hole, I think the sage grouse are doing pretty good. And it's because of you and the people of the Big Hole working together and taking care of the animals that live here. So.
Great. Did you want to show another video or?
Oh, so this is something that I think they should all know about, because when we were down at the Hook and Horn, they were asking about antelope. So can you show us the video that Vanna recently did while she was tracking antelope? And then I'll just briefly show them how she tracks the sage grouse too again.
Okay. Here we go.
As a species are very unique for this landscape and uniquely suited and adapted for it. Behaviorally, because they know they could outrun most things that they encounter, they have a curiosity, and anybody who's hunted them or watched them knows that rather than run away, they often will come closer to you and just kind of test you and see what you're about. So what we wanted to learn were what their movement patterns were at seasonal times of year and their seasonal ranges, whether they were migratory or non-migratory. And then were there any possible barriers to their movements or habitat areas that we could make improvements on? So, we're using the animals to actually tell us where we could do better to manage for them. There's multiple land ownerships, land agencies, land uses that herd of pronghorn are having to get through as they go along their way. Of particular interest here on the Mount Hagen Wildlife Management Area is we have confirmation from at least one collared doe that she and the group that she's with are migrating from Horse Prairie Winter Range all the way up through the Upper Big Hole Valley to the Mount Hagen Wildlife Management Area, probably to the tune of about 80 some miles. And that's the farthest migration that we have identified amongst the collared does in this Horse Prairie Winter Range herd. And it probably is one of the longer migrations that we have here in Montana. The other part of this that excites me is the potential for collaborating with various partners to do some of these projects that will benefit pronghorn. So fence removal projects or habitat improvement projects. Depending on where they are on the landscape, there's potential for us to work with private landowners and individuals, to work with the different agencies for this common goal of making improvements on the landscape for wildlife in full recognition and in context of the human component on the landscape as well. So we believe that there's room for both, not one at the expense of the other, but to have both on the landscape and to work together. And those partnerships are tons of fun.
So just another example of, you know, she just doesn't work with sage grouse. She works with all those animals that are out there. The Sage Grouse Challenge, that's what's about too. They were actually tracking sage grouse. This is what a sage grouse collar looks like. And there are some sage grouse that are in the big hole that have this on their neck that she tracks their movements and sees where the sage grouse go too. So that is science at work. So here at Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, we use all sorts of things that like you learn in school, the different school subjects, math and science are super important and they're involved in everything that we do, along with everything else. So Kathleen, that's about all I have to offer. A great time looking. Someone from Polaris has a big question, it seems like, though. I don't want to let that
Big question.
So, yeah.
Go ahead, Miss Borges' class.
Comment, but if you have hunted pronghorn, you probably know that they are pretty hard to like shoot. They actually have some of the best eyesight of like deer and elk, which is why they're kind of so hard to hunt.
Yeah, along with all these animals, you guys have some really cool wildlife here. It's amazing. So I am off to Billings next. I got to do an archery in the schools workshop. I know you guys actually get to do archery in the schools too. So I'm going to help them, some of the schools in the Billings area, and I'm really sad to leave the Big Hole Valley. I just want to stay here. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed the program here, and stay in touch. Your teacher has our contacts. So if you want to do more, you want to learn more, pester your teacher, and she can contact me and I'll get more things to you. And even if you want to get involved personally, I think Vanna is more than excited to help you guys out too. So you probably meet her down the road. So thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Bye.